So the more they look into it, the brighter the news is, in the sense of making sure that you are supporting the microbes in you that are really good at forming butyrate. So how do you do that? A lot of it has to do with what you choose to eat and drink. And so they're showing 3 different comparisons in this particular paper that they looked at high fat or primarily carnivorous with red meat or a high fiber diet. And the blue box there is trying to show either the up regulation or down regulation of certain populations. So the up arrow, down arrow, that's trying to get across. And then they're looking at the chemicals, metabolites, so postbiotics seem to be the postbiotic nickname. They're just what are the microbes producing, excreting that can then directly impact our cells and body. And so the green path, that's like the go light. No, this is the good. So all of this is short fatty acids, the anti-inflammation, anxiety, and then the ones in red, not so much. So this is a little complex when you look at the blue box here with all the different microbes. It can be challenging to do some of these studies unless you do germ-free mice, where you're looking at what happens with exposure to a very particular microbe. But in general, they've been doing those types of experiments, and they are finding there's what's the word? You know, when you study at college, talk about keystone. Is it keystone species? Is that the right word? Where you have like they're super important. They may not be super abundant, but they're super important in that ecosystem. They're seeing that trend in the microbiome, especially in the gut, the intestinal area, that there seems to be some species that really play pivotal, important roles. But having said that, they are also very much saying that you need a lot of diversity. You don't want to just rely on keystone species and call it good. You have to have a nice, robust, diverse mix of microbes in the gastrointestinal tract. So the idea here, where is it? Oh, well, let me just also point out right here, they're saying effects on the central nervous system. CNS is central nervous system. But before we get into that, let me circle this one. TMAO. Ever heard of that one? That metabolite, TMAO? I had not until fairly recently. Unfortunately, this is something we should be aware of. So TMAO, yeah, the word's on here somewhere. Trimethylamine oxide. Trimethylamine and then oxide, it's the O. So what is that about? It's a byproduct of red meat consumption, but also high-fat dairy. They can find it in egg yolk. So high-fat cheese, they show cheese on there. That's definitely high-fat. Did you know that cheese actually has a blanking on the chemical in it? It's addictive. Did you know that? There's a chemical in cheese that's mildly addicting. I think those of us who love cheese could go, oh yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, I'm blanking on the name of it at the moment. But they find that it's mildly addicting. Anyways, so that's why you might feel good when you eat cheese. But they're saying, unfortunately, when you do eat too much of it, you can end up in situations where this TMAO form. So they're showing, a person eating these types of foods, and it's not that your body's doing it directly. Unfortunately, it's certain microbes in you that are taking these food ingredients and converting them to TMAO. And so it's your gut microbes, and not all of them do this. All right, just certain ones that they've been studying. And why is that bad? It's because it gets into your liver and starts to do some damage. It gets into the TMAO gets into also the can cause cardiovascular disease. And so this is starting to show up more and more, and people are studying this, they're starting to get the word out. Unfortunately, I think TMAO can also form when you cook foods in non-stick, some of the non-stick coating on pans and cooking vessels. Apparently, TMAO can get produced as you're cooking food in that non-stick. So, of course, I have non-stick cookware I just purchased not too long ago. I'll have to double check and see if that's the case with that particular coating. So TMAO, yeah, please be aware of that. It's and they're trying to. So right now they're trying to look at which microbes seem to be playing a heavy role in TMAO production. Are there certain microbes, a bunch of microbes? Is there any way we can manipulate this to decrease the risk? Because there's plenty of people who still eat red meat, high fat dairy, and all of that. So they're trying to figure that out. But it's a story that's just started. They don't have any full answer. I like this quote taken from a paper. As much as a third, 1/3 of an animal's metabolism, i.e. the diversity of molecules that are carried in your blood, has a microbial origin. The circulatory system extends the chemical impact of the microbiota throughout the human body, transporting metabolites that influence physiology and metabolism of distant organs and other bacterial communities in the body. So they're saying that, just because the gut microbes are in your gut doesn't mean they just impact the gut. They're trying to show that when you go and get your blood taken, there are a bunch of other things that are in your blood that, your blood test results never talk about. But you have a lot of chemicals coming from microbes. Just as they're living their life and excreting out their waste products, those chemicals can end up in your blood and circulate through your whole body. Now they're starting to look at, okay, what does that do? And what about the brain? We often hear about the blood-brain barrier. Are there any chemicals that can get out into the brain area or not? So they're looking at that, and the short answer is yes, there are. A lot of this work is being done with germ-free mice again, looking at what happens if you raise germ-free mice to their behavior. And apparently you can run tests on mice to demonstrate anxiety. I don't know exactly how they do that. I haven't delved into that too deeply, but they're publishable. I mean, it's like accepted that this is the way to do it when you work with mice if you're trying to test for anxiety and impacts on anxiety. And so they can show that giving germ-free mice probiotics helps them reduce their anxiety. And that was one of the first studies that was published where they were showing the presence absence of these microbes in germ-free mice and that it was reducing anxiety, depression in mice. So that kind of kicked it off. Everyone's like, whoa, what? And they started looking into that more carefully. So then this term is being thrown around a lot now in literature, the gut-brain, the microbiome gut-brain axis. And they've been looking at all the different stuff that microbes produce that our brain might respond to. And so they are looking at immune substances, neurosubstances that impact both the immune system, interact with the immune system, as well as the brain in terms of nerve impulses. So I'm listing out a bunch of stuff. This is all posted, so you don't have to write all this down. But gamma aminobutyric acid, or GABA, melatonin, serotonin, acetylcholine, histamine, catecholamines. So these may sound familiar, especially if you take an animal or human phys or neuroscience class. These are heavily involved in brain function. So the precursors to these chemicals, not necessarily the actual chemicals, because a lot of these are they just can't make it through the blood-brain barrier, but the precursors to these chemicals can make it through. They've done the studies on it. And so what they're finding is the gut microbes can make a lot of the precursors of these chemicals, and that gets into your blood and up to your brain and can be finished off there and can affect the nerve system. So they are saying, yeah, it is possible for guts living in your, or for microbes living in your guts to impact distant body parts, even the brain. And that was a big surprise. They didn't think that that was going to be likely. I put a couple of slides in here from, I think I may have briefly mentioned this already, but I put it back in here too. Chapter 14 information. We have a little blurb about how some of the food we eat is used by the microbes that then, as they are using the food, they produce waste products that can then be turned into hormones in neurotransmitters. So again, this is some of the earlier published studies. So in those studies, they were saying, yeah, there's precursors, dopamine, serotonin, histamine, GABA, and that microbes are in the gut are doing this. This slide too, I think I might have showed you this way back when, just briefly mentioning it, how the gut microbes can take some of our foods and eat it and produce waste products. These products then we can use and can impact us. So they're looking at this more carefully, and the more they look, the more kind of interesting things they're finding. One study was showing this species, Mycobacterium vaccae. It is commonly found in the soil, and it kind of was a serendipitous experiment. Someone kept noticing that when people worked with plants in soil, they kind of self-reported that they felt less anxiety and they just felt better. And that happened enough times where someone heard it enough and they picked up on it and they started wondering, is there something, some microbe in the soil that is interacting with these people in a way that makes them feel better? And that's where this study, they came out and they declared that this Mycobacterium in the soil was actually helping people as they work with it. You know, they get it on their hand, they might swallow a little bit of it. It interacts with the human by increasing serotonin levels. And then they took it into a mouse study and were showing that it decreased the stress in mice. And so apparently a couple of things they do for mice to induce stress is the maze test. I've seen snippets of video of this. So they make them run a maze test or a forced food test. I don't know if you've ever seen that, where I think that's the one where they have a milky liquid with a platform just under the surface, but you can't see the platform. So the mouse swims around and it's like fear of drowning. It's pretty stressful. And so they do those types of tests. They also saw in this particular study with the mice that they had a proactive coping, it increased their proactive coping strategy when confronted with an aggressive animal. I think it was a cat they presented the mice to. So that's another one. So in general, when they were doing mice studies, especially when they looked at germ-free mice that were raised totally germ-free and started looking at their brain chemistry, they could see a definite difference between conventionally raised mice that had their normal micro partners versus being germ-free. So it was affecting their brain, it was affecting their behavior and moods. Now they are kind of zeroed in on this, the HPA axis, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And they're saying what happens to this when you do germ-free versus conventional raised mice. And they can see that this is malformed or abnormal in germ-free mice. And it messes with the central nervous system behavior, I guess. And again, it manifests as the mice giving an abnormal response when they get presented with stress. And so this has led to a flurry of research going on, looking at okay, how are these microbes impacting brain operation and the brain's ability, and then thinking about the psychology. They have to start out in mice, but they've started to do more human studies too. And this is something that not a lot of people know if they haven't studied any kind of human or animal, but the gut is the biggest digestive organ. I think most people could appreciate that. But it's also the biggest immune organ. Most of our immune system is in our gut. And then it's the largest endocrine organ of the human body, in terms of feeding out hormones and all of that. And it possesses its own nervous system, the enteric nervous system. And so this is really something to think about especially when you think about how many microbes hang out in your gut. Huge population. And okay, so how are they interacting with any of this? And if they are, how? And the answer is yes, they are definitely interacting. And so they work together for tasks like digestion, immune function, endocrine functions, and even neurotransmission, or at least the precursors of the neurotransmitters. Now they're starting to use the phrase gut brain. They're saying that this is a gut brain because you can actually have your gut. It can work without instructions from the brain. Really, I think it's the only organ that can do that. And so that's something to think about. And they're saying, yes, the gut microbes certainly have a huge role to play in digestion and all of that, but that it's also playing a much larger role than ever thought on human behavior, your ability, your cognition. And this has kind of gone out into, not just within the physiology realm, but that previous paper I just showed you, psychology, the field of psychology, they're starting to really look at this and think about, okay, if microbes are impacting our behavior and moods, that would be a fairly easy way to try to improve people, right? Help people out. If we could look at the microbiome and figure out a way to manipulate it to help people have less stress, less anxiety, less depression, that might be an awesome way to think about helping people. And so this is really an exciting time. I think in your lifetime, you're going to see options out there where rather than taking, the typical anti-anxiety or antidepressant drugs that are currently on the market, there's going to be other alternatives that you can consider if you think that, and with consultation with the doctor, of course, if that would be good. And they're really looking too at personalized medicine, like where you're going to be. And I would predict, and not well. Actually, I've already done it. One of my sons, I took him to a doctor here in the area that was able to look very in detail at my son's microbiome because he was exhibiting some illnesses that were very mysterious. And he was able to get it down to the species level. He had enough training in this where he could explain, okay, yeah, these species, that's where you're getting your inflammation from, that's what's causing the symptoms. And he was prescribing ways to get those populations down and raise populations of the better ones that we want in my son's gut. And it was amazing. It worked. Within a matter of 2 months, my son's weird illness disappeared. And so, it's happening already. This idea of personalized medicine where they really fine tune it to each person and not this generic take this drug and one size fits all idea. So I think it's really an exciting time to be thinking about the medical profession and how they can use this information. And so this is taken from a published paper where we're trying to get across the point how the brain and gut can interact and can communicate. And a lot of it is microbes in the gut and their activity. So the vagus nerve. We have to move it more, see things on YouTube and Instagram on vagus nerve, how to do vagus nerve movements. activity and helping you with drugs. So you may see more and more of this idea. But in this idea, they're saying the vagus nerve is a conduit for communication between the brain and the microbes in the gastrointestinal. And with the epithelial cells here, they can show that you can get the microbes here. And in this case, what happens is you have some alteration going on. Just trying to show some possibilities here. And they're showing a process through the epithelial cells, could get into the bloodstream, could get interact with the vagus nerve, other nerves, and then they're trying to show how that can then get up into the brain and impact how the brain functions. So there's been a lot of debate. Okay, if there are any chemicals that are released into the blood, and this blood-brain barrier is pretty good, robust blood-brain barrier. So here they're saying, this image is trying to show, from this published paper, the authors were saying, if there's full-on neurotransmitters, like they're fully formed, they're predicting they won't cross the blood-brain barrier. That's what they're showing here. They don't make it across because they're too big, the receptors aren't there. Here, though, they're saying, but you could have microbes releasing chemicals that stimulate the vagus nerve, interact with the vagus nerve, which then can transmit that signal to the brain. It can alter the vagus nerve activity. And they're saying, and you could have precursors to the neurotransmitters that the microbes in your gut are making, and then they are precursors across the blood. So there's more to it than they initially thought in terms of how the microbes in the gut could possibly be impacting brain function. Studies are showing that even the ability to think clearly and deeply is affected by your microbes. So if you have had stretches of periods of time where you feel like you're in a fog and aren't thinking too clearly, maybe there's something out of whack with your microbes. So learning capacity and memory are closely related to the gut microbes. So if you deprive them or disrupt them in some way, they're showing working memory suffers, spatial memory suffers, but that's not permanent. You can reverse that and get back to better functioning, cognitive function, if you supplement with, in this particular study, they did probiotic supplementation. Mood and emotion they're finding in study. And a lot of this is done in mice, but they've also been able to do human studies that have been nicely controlled. They have good controls, and it's a nicely designed study. And they're finding that supplementing with probiotics, prebiotics, fermented foods, which actually is just both. Fermented foods have pro and prebiotics. Reduces negative behavior and improves emotion. That's another reason why I'd like you to think about increasing fermentation foods in your diet. Research indicates that mental disorders are likely to be rooted in abnormal gut microbiota, and targeting the microbiome should play a role in future therapy. So this was something that would have been ridiculed, 10 years ago. It just was not on anyone's radar and was probably met with a lot of ridicule when this data started to come out. But now they're really realizing how powerful the microbiome can be in terms of the full body impact, not just your gut. Patients diagnosed with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, when they look at their microbiome, it's different. It's different than with people who do not have these diseases. And they are actually, there's one, I think, case study that's going on right now with Alzheimer's, where they're looking at certain species, like they've identified a couple of species that they think are important, and as a probiotic that they can give to Alzheimer's patients. So they're looking at these ideas. May not solve Alzheimer's necessarily. I don't think they're really trying to state that, but they're trying to say it could slow it down or at least help support more normal functioning. Here's another one that just got published with Alzheimer's here. So again, looking at what's going on with the microbiome with patients that have Alzheimer's. So they're looking at gene expression patterns on these bacteria, and they're also looking at mixtures of bacteria. Like, so basically what they're doing is they're looking at who's there, but not just that. They're saying, what are they doing? That's a huge part. And then also looking at comparing the genetic risk factor of the people and looking at any kind of correlation that they can draw from that. And so with this, you know, I have down in the notes, Alzheimer's, most common form of dementia. It is projected to affect 150 million people worldwide by 2050. And so this is something that's not going away. It's only getting worse. And so they're scrambling and trying to look at different angles of how can we approach this disease and at least slow it down. And of course, they're trying to find a way to solve it, but I think that's a ways out yet. So going back to these ideas too, with just, you know, other mental imbalances where you can get depression, anxiety. Again, they're looking at this idea. This was an amazing study that was done in rats where they did fecal transplants. You've probably heard of fecal transplants by now. And so they did that from depressed humans. They took feces from depressed humans and gave them to the rats and looked to see what would happen when the rats got fed. Oral gavage means a tube down throat, and then they got fed the fecal transplant. And this is quotes from that paper. We demonstrate that depression is associated with decreased gut microbiome richness and diversity. So again, decreasing diversity, not a good thing. It induced behavioral and physiological features characteristic of depression in the rats, including anhedonia. I had to look that one up. Anhedonia is the inability to experience pleasure from activities that you usually find enjoyable. Anxiety-like behaviors, and then tryptophan, it has a role to play in feeling calm and even. So their conclusion is that the gut microbiome may play a causal role in the development of features of depression. And I underline the second part because I think this is huge, and may provide a tractable target in the treatment and prevention of this disorder. So more studies are coming out from various researchers all over the world saying, you know, yes, the microbes are playing a role in our moods and behaviors. And that would be a fairly easy way to look at how could we manipulate that in a way to improve the mood and behavior. Part of the link they think might be going on is that certain microbes, if they get imbalanced, they're causing inflammation, and that can trigger anxiety and depression. And so this was a 2019 paper, a little bit older, but they were looking at tying in this idea of this low-level chronic inflammation. And basically, they're saying, yeah, we're starting to see they kind of all go together. This idea of inflammation is linking into depression, anxiety. And so again, a lot of people are starting to come to the conclusion that you need to really focus on ways to reduce inflammation, not just for your physiology, the health of your physiological health, but also your mental. So this is taken from that paper where they're trying to show here stress. Who among us does not have stress? And quite a bit of it right now And so they're showing here that when you have increased gut, you get increased cortisol, which is what's going on in the gut. They're trying to show here that the different guts microbes there and different design. And so when you have that cortisol fading in your body, you can start to get inflammation, you start to get more leaky gut ideas. Here's the endotoxin, that's the LPS we were talking about with gram-negative bacteria. And so that endotoxin can get in, or impact other cells in your body, creates inflammation, which then can influence your brain and your behavior. And then they say if you take it the other way and try to find ways to minimize inflammation, you can then kind of nip this in the bud or reverse it. And so this image is trying to get at that with the red. They're saying you can stop that. And so they're trying to show a little bit increase here in diversity and population levels. So higher population levels of the microbes here. You see some modest level of microbes. This image, they're showing a lot more and trying to show more diversity. They're trying to show that they're pumping out some good short chain fatty acids and other molecules that are good, keeping your tight junctions tight. Everything's good. Low endotoxin leakage, and then you don't get inflammation. So they're starting to tie all this together where inflammation is really playing a more critical role than they thought. Here's another paper that was published just a couple years ago. And so here they were looking at different species that they are predicting to have more impact on so higher abundance of pro-inflammatory species in the family of Enterobacterial Sulfovibrio, lower short chain fatty acid production. So again, that's kind of a double whammy, stimulating inflammation, and then there's not much short chain fatty acids being produced. That's like a double whammy. That's not a good thing. And that's what they were finding in studies. And then some other scientists saying, okay, well, what would be an easy way to help people with not super expensive medication? Have you ever listened to the side effects of the medication that they advertise, where they speed up the person talking and they try to get in all the negative impacts before the 30-second ad is done? It's like, oh my goodness. So there's a lot of side effects of a lot of medication. So they're thinking, is there a way we can kind of simplify this where the side effect risks are very low? And a lot of people are like, well, hey, what about fermented food? People have been doing that for thousands of years. It doesn't seem like there's huge risk side effects. So they were just looking at this, what happens if you give people fermented food? And what does that do to the gut microbiome? What does it do to what they're producing? Short chain fatty acids. So they're functional ingredients. They modify the gut microbiota. They can downregulate endotoxin release. And so again, this idea of what you choose to eat, including whether or not you can incorporate more fermented food or not, has a huge impact on your gut microbes, but then that also goes systemic up into your brain, your mood, your behavior. So if you're thinking about probiotics, there's a lot of businesses that have cropped up in the last few years where they're developing probiotics. And so if you're going to sell something to humans to ingest, it has to be something very safe. And so this list is like a general rule of thumb, I guess, for what should an ideal probiotic look like. And it should be something that we're used to, microbes that hang out with us normally. It should be, of course, no virulence. They should still respond to antibiotics. You still want to be able to have a way to keep them in check if necessary. They should handle gas, when going through your stomach. They should be able to handle that to some extent, or you create a pill design that can make it to protect it. This one's a little weird, catalase negative. So if you remember from lab, that's the test where you put some bacteria down on a microscope slide and then you added hydrogen peroxide. And then what were you looking for when you added the hydrogen peroxide? Bubbles. And that was oxygen, right? So that meant they were catalase positive if you saw the bubbling. Well, you don't want that going on in your gut. You don't want oxygen in your gut just bubbling away. It's going to kill a lot of the anaerobic organisms. And so I thought that was a really cool thing that they thought of that you want catalase negative. That was a really thoughtful approach, that you don't want a bunch of oxygen getting released by these microbes and killing off the anaerobes. They need to be able to adhere to the epithelial cells to some extent anyways, to not just get swept out and never be able to gain a foothold. And should be competitive to the point where they don't just die off the minute they get there. With all the billions of microbes in your gut, if they enter in and they're immediately outcompeted or killed off, that's obviously not a good thing. And you want them to be able to make the right kinds of short-chain fatty acids and help the others do the same. So really, when you look at the bottles of probiotics and you look at all the bacteria there, the vast majority are gram-positive. Because remember, the gram-negatives have a lipopolysaccharide and endotoxin. And so they're very leery about making probiotics with high levels of gram-negatives. That's generally frowned upon. So yeah, by far, all the probiotics I've looked at, their ingredients, they're almost always just full-on gram-positive. And so there's a lot of difference depending on the company, what they're making. The probiotics can be, I've seen some supplements where it's like 1 billion. That's how they started out. Like, well, they even started out only in the millions. Then they ramped it up to like, 1 billion per pill, then 2 billion per pill, 5 billion. So there's a range on how many in the pill. The one I currently take has 50 billion in the pill. And so there's quite a bit of difference. Now they're turning their attention to cancer as well. And any of you who have studied any cancer, you know, I mean, it's just amazing how we've been working on curing cancer for decades. And we've had some good successes, but still falling way short of we need more success. And so this is a worldwide collaborative effort, 40 different scientists. And they're looking at, in this particular study, they found 11 bacterial strains that really ramped up the immune system and slowed the growth of melanoma in mice studies. So of course they got to take it into the human realm, but this was a big breakthrough. The fact that you could pinpoint certain microbes and say, hey, these could actually work if you have the animal access to them. So since then there's been lots of papers. Manipulation of the gut bacteria promises to form the basis of an important immunotherapeutic strategy. So there's lots of research going on in this. I think it's a great idea. It's just another avenue to really explore that hasn't really been focused on to date. Oh, here's another one too, this last paper. You may have heard know people who take chemotherapy and it works well for some people and not so well for others, where some people can go into remission and others end up dying. And now they're starting to wonder, they're like, I wonder if it's how much the gut microbes are playing a role in the success rate. I think that's a great idea to look at because that inconsistency has been a big puzzle. So I think some microbes could have something to do with that. Of course, thinking about colorectal cancer, it can make sense that the gut microbes might influence that. And so they're looking at that really carefully. And again, that comes down to the SAD diet, the standard American diet, and the impact that what you can have on colon cancer. The statistics on colon cancer, by the way, are scary. They're coming down into your population, your age group, and lower. Even teenagers are getting colon cancer at unprecedented rates. And they're pointing to the SAD diet. They're saying it's this, the primary culprit, they believe, the diet and the processed food, low fiber food. And so finding ways to manipulate your gut microbiome and get the ones that are producing butyrate and short chain fatty acids. We're finding ways to tip the balance into the better composition. So right there, they're saying increased abundance of fiber. So you don't have to answer this question, but how many of you think you get enough fiber per day? You don't have to answer it out loud, but just think about that. I know I don't. I strive to, but I've missed the mark too often. But I was listening to a podcast the other month. It was a few months ago, and he was a microbiome researcher. And the interviewer said, "Okay, we have to, our time is up. What would be your parting statement to people listening? What's one thing they could do to improve their chances of being healthier all the way around?" And he said fiber. He said that is an easy thing to fix, especially nowadays. You can buy those powders that totally dissolve in water, just suck it down. He says that's the easiest manipulation you can do and relatively cheap. Increase your fiber. Of course, you can get it from fruits and vegetables and all of that, but there's other ways too. All right, so I guess we got to stop there. Went over it a little anyways. So we'll finish this up on Monday, I